What did your husband hide from you until after you were already married? Story 1. That he was in the military. I had recently enlisted in the Army when I met him out one night. He told me he was a Marine veteran, and that's how we started talking. He told me stories about his time overseas, and how he still keeps in touch with his military buddies. We eventually get married 2 years later, and when I applied for a VA loan under his name, I got a letter from DOD that they had no record of him ever being in the military. He fabricated the whole thing. He would ask for military discounts constantly, and would tell these elaborate war stories to people all while wearing old military clothes. When I confronted him about all the lies, he started yelling at me. We are now divorced. Story 2. Night terrors. Had her first one a couple months into the marriage. She went right back to sleep. I, of course, was prepared for battle. The next morning, when I asked her if she wanted to talk about it, she said, "Talk about what?" I said, you screaming like you're being killed in the middle of the night." Her reply was, "Oh yeah, I do that sometimes." Story 3. Nothing. He passed away 6.5 years ago now, and despite having access to all his emails, texts, notes, and other personal things, I never found anything unexpected. In fact, I mostly found things about how much he loved me and his personal stuff. Story 4. Not quite on topic, but my wife was a therapist. I found out after she passed that she was basically free therapy for my college roommate, his sons, and some of my relatives. A couple of them asked if I wanted to know what they talked about, and I told them if she wanted me to know, she would have told me. Story 5. I had an experience with a friend. We grew up together in the hood. At his wedding, he told this story about how we grew up wealthy and traveled the world with his parents while growing up and university educated. In reality, he's from the projects and lived butt poor and never finished university. I had to sit there and listen to him tell the story at his wedding. I still hang with him and his wife. He keeps telling this lie and it makes me crazy. Story 6. Never got married, thank God. But my ex hid that he nearly killed his previous ex and her little sister in a car accident where he was totally at fault. I believe his ex was in a medically induced coma for a few days. He broke up with her as soon as she was awake. Why? Because she had a brain injury, and those are always a little tricky to predict on how much someone will recover from. Didn't find this out until I was practically moved in with him, and while organizing my things with his, found his box of court documents pertaining to the crash. Found out that another ex of his committed suicide, that I found out from an ex-friend of his after I had broken up. Ex-friend fully believes he pushed his ex to do it, and considering the state of my mental health when we had broken up, I believe it. He was really good at breaking people down in such sneaky ways. Was never blatantly verbally abusive. It was always offhand comments or passive-aggressive remarks. Story 7. Scrabble is my game. I had never lost to anyone until the first time my husband and I played against each other. He obliterated me. I had talked a big game and I was flabbergasted. 7 years into our marriage, he admitted during a couple's party game that he had waited until I went to the bathroom and swapped out some tiles. Story 8. When I first married my wife, I thought she was taking the pill. She was taking it before we got married, BTW. During our first 4 months together, I realized she was an alcoholic. While dating, I thought she couldn't hold her alcohol on weekends. 6 months into our marriage, she became pregnant, and I asked her how that could be since she was on the pill. She nonchalantly said that she didn't think it was important to tell me because she thought it would take longer for her to get pregnant. Meanwhile, I am worried about her excessive drinking every night. I only drank on weekends when we were with friends socially. Fortunately, it was a normal pregnancy, but after that she had 2 miscarriages which I felt had to do with her alcoholism. After 4 rehabs and me divorcing her after 19 years of marriage, she finally hit her bottom and stopped. It was a tough 19 years. I am happy to say she has been sober the past 10 years. Story 9. That he was unemployed and in the middle of a bankruptcy case, and he also lost his house to foreclosure. The worst part is that I never found out about any of this until years later when we were getting divorced. He hid so much from, and I still have no clue how. Story 10. Not married, but my girlfriend of several years hid the fact that she is a huge Trekkie from me for the first 8 months or so of our relationship. We were watching some sci-fi movie and she remarked that ships almost always look symmetrical. I made the point that Star Trek had some race that had odd ships. She goes the Breen, mentioned in TNG but seen the first time in DS9. I was like, what? And then she shyly showed me her DVD collection of the series and a couple of models. It's been 8 years now. We boldly go together. Story 11. Not quite marriage, but I wasn't 100% honest about how well I handle spices until we moved in together. Husband is a massive lover of spicy food, and when we were dating, I kind of faked that I could keep up. But when we moved in together and were eating most of our meals together, I had to come clean that I'm more of a herbs than spices girl. Story 12. This is so mild compared to some of the other comments, but my husband hid the true breadth of his nerdom. He moved in the day we got married and came clean about how many evenings he spent gaming. I knew he had a room full of D&D and other table games, but I didn't know he has far more than that, and he has a massive war history collection. His stuff has taken over most of a 1,400 square foot basement. Story 13. Not wife, but turned out after 4 years of dating as well as living together for 2+ that she had been lying to me the entire time about her health. I was worried about her blood pressure and sugar intake. I had been diagnosed with diabetes and high blood pressure for a while and saw warning signs in her. She said she didn't have a history with either. We had spoken multiple times about a need to eat healthier and be healthier as a couple. We both wanted kids and discussed the topic often. I respected that it was her choice and did my best to work around her decision for my own health while encouraging her in a positive manner when possible. About 5 months ago, her mom called me at work saying she was having trouble talking and had other stroke symptoms. Rushed her to the hospital. On intake, she said she didn't have any underlying conditions. That turned out to be a lie. 240/130. Never got rushed into a room faster. Over the next 2 days, she had a series of strokes, going from having a bit of aphasia to not be able to say her own name. She's doing much better now, but I can't tell you how horrifying it is to go from having an active conversation with someone to within minutes then not being able to remember the names of our dogs or her favorite books, things that were central to who she was. I then found out from her mother that she was diagnosed with both in 2017, that she told her mother never to tell me, that she stopped taking her medication to manage both in 2019 right before she met me. I remember being dumbfounded. I had both conditions. I worked on myself to deal with them both, but somehow she didn't feel a need to take care of herself, let alone won't even tell me about it. Even expressed to her that I was worried she might develop them, she didn't take care of herself. I was very numb for a while after that. We had already been going through a variety of rough issues, but that one broke the camel's back. I don't hold any ill will. I just was sad afterwards. I just hope she gets better and receives the help she needs. Story 14. That my, now ex-wife, is a complete narcissist but hides it extremely well, including when we were dating. Everyone around her thinks she's this strong, smart, funny, beautiful, confident woman who's the embodiment of motherhood and virtue. Plot twist, she's not. Behind closed doors in the marriage, she was a control freak who needed absolutely everything her way. She would wear me down over hours, days, even years until I gave in. I was never allowed to say no to her. She would always ask me to explain myself, then go on to point out why I was wrong. She never could just apologize. Anytime she said sorry, she would always have to explain herself. This always involved her rationalizing her behavior, like yelling at me about not putting the dishes away correctly, and it turning into my fault for her reactions. She's a perfectionist too, and so very judgmental about it. When she was pregnant, she read literally every parenting book out there and was so judgmental of other moms who didn't do all the things she did. This whole attitude of hers that's she the perfect one, and you have to meet her standards made life extremely anxious for me and the kids. She was extremely moody and volatile, but only behind closed doors. Outside the doors of the marriage, she was gregarious, but once inside, the mask came off, and she loved to gaslight me about my perceptions of things. My memory was never correct. How I perceived things was always wrong. I kiss the ground every day now that I'm out of that marriage. Story 15. Not until they were married, but far too long into his relationship with my brother's now wife, she believed he had gone to college. I was actually the one that outed him when we were playing a drinking, never have I ever sort of game, and he raised his hand when the question was, "Have you ever gone to college?" I just looked at him, confused, and said, "Why do you have your hand up? You never went to college." They had quite the talk that night. I honestly understand and feel bad for him about it. He's a great dude, hard worker, smarter than average, but has extreme ADHD. Like, top 1% extreme, diagnosed. Because of that, sitting still and studying were always a problem for him. He's almost 30, and still not great at spelling. A lot better than he used to be. He put a lot of effort in, but it's noticeable. There is basically a crapshoot. Because of this, he hates texting, but anyways. He's married, works in restaurants where his multitasking and constant high energy are an asset, and is doing great. Couldn't be more proud of him. He's still insecure about his intelligence, but he grasps complex concepts better than my other normal friends can debate a subject pretty well, and is quick as a whip when it comes to humor. Just goes to show, you can struggle in some areas and still excel in others. Just find your niche. Story 16. Well, she said she wants to go a colleague's wedding and I allowed it. Apparently, she wasn't happy with the way I didn't ask any questions. She went and I called her, and she said she's in resort with her colleagues, 3M and one other F. We had a fight that time and she said I never ask about her, etc., so she didn't tell anything. Fast forward 8 months, I discovered her chats with one of those men. It was in a romantic way where he is praising her beauty body, etc. She admitted she might have gone out of line, but kept insisted she didn't have sex with him. Went into series of fights. Then I pulled this up and said, what's guarantee you didn't have when you were in a resort with him? She insists she didn't. Both of our families are trying to convince us to reconcile. It's been a tough 3 weeks for me. Story 17. Ex-wife hid the fact she stole my SSN and info, got school loans in my name for nursing school. Soon as she graduated, blindsided me with divorce and left with my dog. I really miss my dog. She can burn though. The entire time we were married, I stupidly thought her mom and grants is how she was paying for it. Story 18. My girlfriend hid the fact that she was on a TV show in the early 2000s. Not so bad, right? Except the show was part of a series where each week 4 different single girls and 4 single guys were put into a villa. I think it was filmed in Spain somewhere, plied with copious amounts of alcohol, and then the following carnage was filmed for entertainment. I used to watch this show weekly. Girls were getting their backs blown out by these guys, and they would all be filmed around this villa, and all the drunken antics and games were filmed too. They would go into town to bars and drink heavily, British culture. And even if they didn't match up with the pairing that was intended for them, they could go with whoever they liked, and other holidaying tourists could get with them too. Luckily for me, my girlfriend spoke about the experience, but wasn't one of the standard girls that went on there and got naked and fucked by 3 of the 4 guys. Kinda normal for this show. She said that her and another girl on the show didn't find the guys attractive, so they just did their own thing and got drunk and enjoyed the holiday/food/experience at the expense of the production team. I do remember it being voiced over by an Australian guy, Mark, something that was in Neighbours. So yeah, my girlfriend was on Sky One's The Villa. I have emailed them trying to find footage for her birthday, but to no avail. Story 19. That she was a verbally, emotionally, and sometimes physically abusive sociopath. She was proud of being diagnosed with ASPD a few years into the relationship, and when I said I was concerned because of what I'd read about it, she told me, oh, but how I feel about you is different. I was fucking stupid to believe her, but in the beginning she seemed extremely sweet, charming, and I thought I was so lucky to be with her. She slowly got me isolated from friends and family over 3 years, and would belittle plus shout plus demean me whenever we were alone. She threatened to hurt herself if I left, and at one point I was afraid of going to sleep in case she messaged in the middle of the night saying she was going to do it. She was also heavily against me getting any mental health treatment of my own because, in her words, everyone I've dated has pretended to have a mental illness just because I do. When our relationship finally crashed and burned, I also had a horrific breakdown and was hospitalized by the cops and a crisis counselor. That hospitalization was actually the best thing to ever happen to me. I finally got to speak with a psychiatrist and therapist, and speaking to my roommate / the other patients in the hospital also helped open my eyes to how horrible things really were. I've been stable and medicated for type 2 bipolar disorder and ADHD for over a decade now. It was a horrific few years, but it also taught me what to look out for in relationships in the future, and to never get trapped like that again. I'm never going to put myself in the mindset of being an abused caretaker for someone else ever again. Story 20. I've been with my wife for about 12 years and still keep exactly how much I stand to inherit. My grandfather worked 50 years for a company for 45 years as part of his benefits. Stock was included. He eventually had a 7-figure stock portfolio but never lived a lavish life. My grandmother was killed in an accident with an 18-wheeler from Nationwide Logistics Company. A wrongful death lawsuit was settled out of court for 7 figures. My mother was an only child and inherited it all. My parents still both work and live a very modest lifestyle, and the majority of the money hasn't been spent. My wife's made commitments when my parents have made cash purchases, but I've played it off. I have one sibling who has 2 kids. My mom has sworn me to secrecy about splitting it 50/50ths with my sibling BC. They have 2 kids who will be set up with trust funds from their share. Story 21. Wife didn't tell me how loaded her family was. Her folks lived in a nice but not opulent home, so I knew they were doing well, but I didn't know how well until a bit later. The good, we take some really awesome vacations with them. Her parents occasionally help us on big-ticket purchases, and my kids have college funds big enough to see them through medical school if they want to. The obnoxious. We are definitely seen as the poors of the family. Doesn't matter that I'm self-made and worked my way from a blue-collar background to a $150K plus year job. They all still act like we're a charity case, wife included. Story 22. Who she was. I swear it was like Jekyll and Hyde. Once we got married, all of the things I liked about her changed. Suddenly, she took no interest into things that we had enjoyed. Plus, the abuse really started. And at one point, I asked her who that person was, and she told me, and I quote, "Well, I figured that we're married, now I could stop pretending to like all those things." Story 23. Dated a woman in college for 2 years, who then dumped me for a much better man. He spent lavishly on dates, and was so respectable that he wouldn't have premarital sex. He proposed after 1 month, and they married 1 month later. First call from her in tears. Turns out he's not well endowed and the sex is terrible. That explains no premarital sex. Second call from her in tears. Turns out he was going bankrupt. That explains the lavish spending. She lost all the savings she built up with me. Third call from her in tears. "I just found his hash, tea on the vibrator you bought for me. Can you help me move out?" Why I put up with this. Her daughter and I became so close that she often slipped and called me dad. I did it to benefit her. She is married with 3 kids now, and we still talk. Story 24. First wife waited until invitations had gone out and all vendors paid for to break down and tell me her mom had been undermining our relationship and begging her not to marry me since before we got engaged. It was totally unfounded, as I had no vices. College educated from a top university and gainfully employed with a solid family who supported our relationship. It was about control. I found out her brother had moved to the other side of the state specifically to get away from her when he got married. We ended up getting married anyway, and it lasted 1 year before we divorced because her mother never stopped, and it eventually worked. I started defending our marriage to her face after a while, but we were working opposite schedules sometimes because she was a nurse and that didn't help. When we separated, I lit her mother up like a bonfire and told her everything I had been holding in. Had to warn her dad it was better for him to just sit there and listen. Good news is my current wife of 20 plus years has been a far better spouse and her family is great.